My sister, Clara, is 6 years old. As 6-year-olds go, she is normal. She plays with Barbie and dozens of colored plastic horses, sporting braided manes and tails. She plays with my old toys too, Action Man and his truck with the big plastic gun, my favorite as a young boy. I'm now 18. The only striking thing about Clara is in 6 years of existence, she has never said a single word. Mom and Dad tried everything, bribing, begging, scolding, grounding. It's just an irrefutable fact. Clara doesn't talk to anyone. It's Clara's birthday today. Her cake had a pink pony holding a bunch of balloons on it, and now it lies in tatters. Only the ice balloons have survived. Her gifts are laying in various stages of opening. As of right now, she's asleep on Aunt Gloria's knee, sucking her thumb like a sleeping cherub. The gift Gloria gave her is the one and only thing she's played with all day, and I hate it. Looking at that thing makes me physically sick. Gloria and Clara both speak to each other, but they never use words. They never make a sound when in direct company, but they can hold entire conversations through eyebrow wiggles and gestures. It can be pretty spooky sometimes, but even her favorite auntie is locked out of the thoughts of Clara. Gloria gave Clara an old grotty necklace with a locket on it. The necklace itself is formed into minute links, a chain snaking elegantly around Clara's fine porcelain wrist, and the necklace itself is always clutched in her fist. There is also a hideous black stone set into the locket that seems to suck the warmness out of the air. There is something really wrong with that thing, I'm sure of it. It's midnight, and something has woken me up. It's Clara, standing in my doorway, with the moonlight illuminating her from the landing window behind her. She looks pale, unwell, and all I see is that damn necklace nestled in her nightdress. She's just standing there, and every few seconds, she moves her small hands up to the locket, and she starts fiddling with it. "What's the matter?" I mumble, groggy from the sudden disturbance. Clara holds her nightdress away from her body and shifts her weight. "Did you have an accident?" I whisper. She nods. So I climb out of bed and shuffle over to her. Crouching down to her level, I say, "Let's go to the bathroom then." One of her little white hands interlaces with mine, and we slowly walk to the bathroom at the end of the hall. I clean her up and put her in clean night clothes. As I'm helping her get in a new set of clothes, I start moving my hand to take off the necklace that she's became obsessed with, but she renders a boiling glare, and she shakes her head. So I withdraw my hand and leave the necklace be. Thinking no more of it, I take her to my room and put her in my dry bed. It can wait till morning before I clean hers. I eventually fall asleep, sitting up with Clara huddled in my arms. Over the next 2 weeks, the bedwetting continues, and it gets worse too. Now she alternates between waking my parents and me. Nobody is sleeping, nobody can rest, and she's losing weight, refusing to eat and drink, crying and curling into a ball when we try to make her eat. We also been to the doctor several times, and no one can find an answer. They say Clara is being difficult and it will pass. But it didn't pass, and it only got worse. way worse. Now, she's headbutting the wall at night. I want you to picture the scene. You're sleeping in your room, and you hear your sister or your brother in the room next to you headbutting the wall all night. But last night, I walked into her room, and she was sitting, facing the wall. Behind her, a circle of toys, blocks, shoes, and the somewhat disturbing sight of heads ripped off of Barbies. And on the walls, a crudely drawn picture, which is definitely the art of a child. The picture was of nothing that I recognized, so I just lifted her light body from the ground and put her back in bed. As I put her in bed, she stared at me, something she never did. I had only ever seen her make eye contact when she was hurt or scared, but tonight she grabbed my arm for a short second before dropping her hand back onto the bed and closing her tired little eyes. As the hours go by, I'm having trouble falling asleep, and something doesn't feel right. I can hear a voice coming from my sister's room. I slide out of bed and I start tiptoeing along the corridor. I get to the door of Clara's room and I press my ear up to her door and I jump back. The door is hot. Wrapping my hand in my shirt, I open the door and I'm greeted by complete and utter chaos. In the middle of the floor sits Clara. Around her is the entire contents of her bedroom, splintered like toothpicks and thrown around. She's kneeling in the center as if in prayer, with that infernal locket in between her hands. The walls bleed, the ceiling is cracked, and standing over her, whenever I dare to blink, is a shadowy figure. Leaning her head forward so the jewel of the locket presses against her head, Clara smiles, then her head snaps up and she stares right at me again. The shadow over her shoulder finally appears to me. As I distinguish the shadow, all I see is a hideous beast staring at me. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come.
Who is this surplus human?
Whispers the beast in my sister's ear, holding her chin with a sharp claw hand, making me flinch. I clear my throat, ready to answer, but Clara beats me to it. She moves her hand towards the sharp claw hand on her cheek and smiles gently. I think the demon is able to read what she's thinking as it retreats.
Unspoken one says, brother.
The demon says in a questioning tone in its voice. I simply nod yes, and it disappears and reappears in front of me, standing up to its full height. The thing must be 9 feet tall, with spikes along its spine and nails sharp enough to pierce steel. But I don't feel like it's a threat. I feel like I've known this monster all my life.
Join the family of dark?
The demon is asking me. I don't understand. What do you mean? The demon crouches and places a hand on my chin.
For 2 lives, 1 guy's.
It says, the attempt at human language, confusing it. Clara comes over to me and holds the necklace out to me, indicating I take it. I actually wanted to grab that thing and throw it out the window, but instead, I simply take a hold of it. Upon taking hold of the locket, a red tinge comes over my vision, like a pair of tinted spectacles have been placed on my face. Clara smiles, a genuine happy smile, and taking the demon's hand, she offers her other hand out to me, and I take it. It's been 8 months since that night with the demon, and he's always visiting, almost weekly. My sister talks to demons, and ever since I met one, I haven't said a single word. When I was a child, it was just me and my mother. We lived in a property owned by my grandma, a 3-story old farmhouse right at the fringe of the woods. It was far off the road, down a long, unlit gravel driveway. It felt very isolated at night, being so distant from any other houses. It was set in an area that wasn't inhabited for 30 years before we started living in it. Quite often, I was a fairly rambunctious child, so while my mom went off to work, I would occasionally skip the morning bus to school and stay home alone all day. The big house had a habit of feeling incredibly lonely, so I spent most of my time playing in the forest, out in the back, some distance into the woods, far enough that I could hear my mother when she called. There was a toppled pine tree which had crashed into another. An even larger trunk on its way down was now frozen there, forming a long arc over the forest floor. I loved to climb up the jagged stump at the base of this fallen tree and then steady myself to a point just above the middle. I was never able to make it all the way to the top because it just got too steep for me to continue any further, and I had a bad habit of freaking out from how high up I was. One day, I was sitting in my usual spot on the fallen tree, which was a good distance from the ground, just listening to the birds singing and simultaneously feeling the warmth of the sun on my neck, when I heard something strange from underneath that paralyzed me in shock. "Hey kid." I was gripped by a sudden strong surge of fear for a moment. The voice had come from directly underneath me. I strained to look down, but I couldn't see anything over the ledge. For a long time, I just sat there in absolute silence, and I was at the point where I was almost soon to convince myself that I had imagined hearing a man's voice at all. "I know you can hear me." His voice was much louder this time, as I yelled something out and scrambled up the log a bit higher, trembling nervously. I dug my fingernails into the bark and held tight for dear life. I sat there, trying to collect my nerves for God knows how long. Even though I couldn't see it, the presence of the thing underneath me was still clear, was much softer and more cautious this time. And when I listened closely, I swear I could hear the faintest echo of a human breathing. Gathering all my courage, I vowed to prove to myself that it was all my imagination by leaning over the ledge as far as I possibly could without slipping right off. Digging hard into the bark behind me, I stretched out along my arms and peered over, getting a full view of the empty forest floor and an undergrowth, when suddenly, "Come down here or I'll come up and grab you." It was so loud. It was as if it was being screamed right in my face. I released my grip on the tree in fright and plunged off the platform. I was saved only by grabbing a nearby branch, and for one awful second, my bare legs dangled in the cool air. When I pulled myself up, I ran at full speed to the top of the collapsed pine, to the point I had never reached before. I sat there, just below the rustling canopy, pissing myself and staring at the distant base where the splintered wood rose, fully expecting at any moment to see someone crawling rapidly up the pine towards me. Instead, all I heard was the wind whistling in the leaves above and below me, and occasional snippets of birdsong. It was about 2 hours before my mother got home and found me, after much worry, searching, trembling, and crying at the top of the fallen tree. Although this incident spooked both me and my mother, in time I somehow recovered, exhibiting the naive hard skin of a child, even though I never went as far into the forest as I used to, and never again even approached that fallen tree. Once, when I was 12, I had the chore of taking firewood from the shed out back, just at the edge of the woods, and to bring it back inside the house. It was a tiresome job, and I always chose to do it at dusk, when the air was brimming with mosquitoes and a swampy fog that usually coated the lawn. By the time I had my last round, I would sprint back to the house, spooked. One of my least favorite things about this job was that the shed was full of barn owls. If you have never seen a barn owl's face staring at you from a dark roof corner, then you will know how uncomfortable that shed made me. One of these nights, it got mistier than it had ever been before. A thick silver fog covered everything and limited my line of sight to a short sphere around me. Even though the shed wasn't far from the house, I found myself feeling disoriented, and more than once I walked in the wrong direction, both times for some reason walking straight into the woods. By the time I had reached my last load, it was too foggy to see the street. My eyes stung in the moisture, and it made my vision blur. Lurching forward, I managed to walk headfirst into a tree. Doubling over and dropping all of the wood I was bundling onto my feet with a hard crunch. As I went to pick them up, with my foot throbbing pretty hard, I realized that the ground was too misty for me to see my own knees. I decided to head to the house, since we had more than enough wood for one night. However, it was getting to be pretty dark, and I couldn't make out any signs of which direction I was heading in. Even though I cautiously walked for several feet in all directions, trying to figure out my position in the mist, I still couldn't figure out any point of identification. I couldn't even locate the fence or the gate, and the more I walked, the more I seemed to stumble into trees, pine needles, and mud crunching under my feet instead. After a while, I finally realized that I couldn't even find the shed anymore. Cursing myself for being so dumb, while trying to ignore my thumping heart and sense that something else was at play, I became aware that I was lost, somewhere in the forest. I then started screaming out for my mother at the loudest possible volume I could, but was only met with a resounding silence from the depths of the mist all around from where I stood, affirming that I had wandered too far from the house to be heard. As a deep panic started to settle on me, I noticed a glimpse of something pink moving against a nearby pine trunk. Coming closer, I saw that it was a ripped out square of pink paper. On it, there was an arrow pointing left. It looks vaguely like something my mom would make, I rationalized to keep me from getting lost. So I followed the direction set by that green arrow, shivering in the increasing cold. I kept walking for about 5 to 10 minutes before needing to stop to take a breath. My heart was pounding so fast, it was beginning to hurt. As I was sitting down, however, I spied what appeared to be another note hanging on a nearby trunk. I noticed this one was embedded with a long nail. It bore another arrow, this one pointing up, and a small, sloppy written note that said, "This way." Despite my increasing panic, I convinced myself that these notes were my only shot at getting back before nightfall. I was desperate to get the hell out, and my eyebrows were cold with sweat, so I followed the green arrow to a point where I could just dimly make out another spot of pink up an incline of collapsed stumps and leaf litter. At this point, it was getting pretty dark, and I had to strain both my eyes just to see a few meters ahead of me, following the green arrows, feeling more and more lost of where I was. I stumbled through the woods, groping out in the mist to feel for trees, even though I was terrified of something unseen grabbing my arm. I came across the third green note, which had another arrow pointing up again. This one led to a steep slope that I didn't recognize being anywhere near my house, and it was with a poorly drawn smiley face right above it. At this stage, I became too freaked to cope and started to cry there a little. As I slumped against the pine stump, the possibility that I would be out in these woods all night was beginning to sink in, like a syringe being driven into the veins within my arm. I caught a glimpse of another pink square in the near distance. Squinting hard, despite the previous week's nonstop rain, I read it from afar. What I read made my blood turn cold. I stood to my knees, dead silently, wobbling on them in fear. My ears were sensitive to any tiny prickle of noise in the mist. For a long time, I stood there in the rolling fog, reading that horrible note over and over again, until a snapping stick somewhere behind me caused me to sprint, blindly, twigs snapping at my ankles and cutting up my face as I ran. Written on the note, in big green letters, was my name. It felt like I was running for hours. All the while, the rain and mist lapped at the back of my neck, like the decaying breath of someone running right behind me. Somehow, I made it back to the house. All the lights were off, and I struggled to find the keys for a moment. When I found them, I bolted indoors and quickly crawled into bed, where I remained unsleeping till morning. My mom just thought I had come inside and gone to bed, and hadn't thought to leave the lights on. It was a miracle, aka some freakish coincidence, that I even found the house that night at all. The final incident at that damn house was witnessed only by my mother. Up until then, she had never experienced any of the strange things as I had, even though we mutually shared the same oppressive quality that the house's interior had on us and its placement in the woods. Although I was obviously never a popular kid, by living way out in the country in the opposite direction from everyone else at my school, I did make some tight friends in my first year of high school. One of these friends, Amanda was her name, invited me over one night, and I accepted. My mother drove me out to the place, which was about 3 miles away, then drove back home. The night went well. We watched a horror movie, devoured some pizza, smoked a little pot. My mother went home alone, where she intended to get some writing done. She worked for a magazine at that point. It was about midnight, when I received an off-putting text from Mom in all caps. Is this a prank? I need to know immediately. Thinking it was some kind of joke, I texted back, calm yourself. Is what a prank? She responded immediately. Are you at the house? Of course I responded no. I didn't receive another message until around 3 a.m. when she told me to go to my grandma's in the morning and to not by any means dare go home. I remember those drops of rain the day I went to my grandmother's and how terribly soaked I was when I finally got there. It was nearly 2 towns away. I had to fight the temptation to go home and drop off my bags. But Mom's disturbing messages from last night were enough of a warning not to do so. When I arrived, Mom and Grandma were having lunch. At first, my mother seemed to be in some sort of a composed state, but when I got a better look at her, I noticed that all of the color had drained from her face and she was slightly trembling. At one point, she even sent a small glass crashing to the floor after flinching at the cat brushing around her ankles. It wasn't until later that night, when my grandma was sound asleep, that she told me what happened. She even went further as to forbid me from telling old grandma, out of fear that it would horrify her superstitious soul too much. This was what happened the night when I was at Amanda's, and she described it in detail. My mother was sitting on the first story in the living room, where she sat on the couch by the fire, curtains open to the view of the sunset on the canopy, going over her latest draft. At first, it was so faint that she barely noticed it. But after a while, my mother became aware and vaguely irritated by tiny thumping noises near her head at the window. When she went over to investigate, she saw a fat brown moth of a kind we often get at that place, buzzing madly into the glass. Reasoning that this was the cause of the sound, she returned to her work, however, feeling rattled in some way. It was when the noises started to get sharper and louder that she paid more attention and saw that rocks were being thrown at the window from the total blackness of the forest edge. She saw them appear from the shadows of the bush and then fall in an arc and bounce off the window. Looking carefully, she could see some cracks from where some heavy ones had hit, right beside where her head had been moments before. Captivated, she tried to peer into the darkness enough to make out where the rocks were being thrown from. Then, with a startled shock, she jumped back from the window as she saw me standing half behind a tree right near the window, grinning wide and staring at her. My one visible eye stretched wide open, showing all the white. She barely let out a scream, seeing her own daughter standing there, just staring and smiling. Not only did this figure not move or blink, it was standing by one of the nearest pines, far from where the rocks were shooting up out of the bush, as they continued to do so in a loud downpour. My face continued to press out at her, smiling, thinking this was all some kind of sick prank. My mother shouted my name at the top of her lungs. However, instead of responding, the mouth of this thing behind the tree just started moving, as if it were saying words silently, really, really fast. Suddenly, it turned its head to the side, and it seemed to be speaking with someone else behind the tree, my mom said, who couldn't be seen. But she could see a formless black shape hanging against the other side of the tree. The girl that looked like me kept staring at my mother and doing the silent, speed-talking thing, then turning and whispering to the thing next to her. Then she would turn back and start up again. Breaking the spell, she suddenly pointed straight at my mother and started laughing. My mother screamed and fled to my bedroom on the second story, where she shut herself in and sat at the far end of the bed as the rocks began to pitter-patter against the window downstairs. In my room, my mother said she did not feel safe. There was an awful smell and a weird humming noise in the walls, as she described. She tried to pray for a time before giving up and just listening to the rocks pelt the walls and windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, she caught the distinct sound of a window actually smashing and the weird, continuous humming. Listening more carefully, she could identify it as the softest hint of a mumbling voice. In absolute horror, she recognized the voice, and then, too afraid to look, she tilted her head up to the closet door, where an awful, white face could be seen staring right at her, with its mouth contorting and gapping in what sounded like Heidi sped up whispering. The closet door was only a meter from my mother. It then started to open slowly. My mother immediately bolted to the door, only to fumble with the lock as bigger and bigger rocks came crashing through the window, which burst apart in a spray of glass shards before finally getting out. Running out the house, completely keeping her eyes off the woods, getting into her vehicle and driving off. She said as she glanced back right at the end of the drive, and she saw two unmistakable human forms standing at my broken bedroom window, watching as her vehicle got further and further away from our house. This would be their final farewell, as my mother never stepped foot in that place again. As my mother told this story, she broke down into tears. I didn't doubt her, and I still don't. I truly believe that she experienced what she said she did. It was also quite clear that we were done living in that house for once and for all. I only went back once with my dad, who I rarely see now. He came from another state to help us move. Mom had already found a place in town and moved in. My dad and I just loaded up his truck with all that was left inside there. It was silent, sunny morning when we removed all the stuff and emptied the place. I wish I could say there was some closure, some final spooking to cap it all off, but there wasn't. It was just a relief to be out of there. There are, however, two things that I have to mention. When we checked the house for any signs of intruders, we found that several windows, including one in my bedroom and the kitchen, had been smashed and rocks were lying on the floor. 2. Dad went out into the trees for a bit to take a leak. When he came back, he asked me how long we had the swing set for. Needless to say, we never had a swing set, so I was fairly unsettled to discover that in the week since we had been gone, someone had assembled a rope swing set from one of the highest branches of the old pine over the ridge, against which was the fallen log I had stopped climbing many years ago. It was obviously new rope and a nicely polished, sanded down wooden set. Dad, wanting to keep my mind from recent events, said that a neighbor maybe set it up, not realizing it was on our property. Of course, he knew as well as I did that we had no neighbors for at least a mile in any direction. There were no houses in all that space, and never in my time living there did I ever see any other signs of humans living. But I let it all go and was pleased enough just to say good riddance to that horrible place as we drove off for good. For the most part, I found it best to try and forget what happened at that place. Sometimes I just can't help but ponder it, even though it's been long enough now that I no longer feel scared talking about it. But for a long while, I couldn't. My grandma just recently sold the house to a new family, that being a young couple and their little son, shortly after we moved out. Despite my mother's desperate insistence that it be left empty, now she refuses to talk about what happened altogether. I'm less anxious about it, even though sometimes I can't help but let my imagination get the better of me. All I can do is think of that old house, the fallen down tree, the new family that moved in, and the swing out back, gently spinning in the breeze, as that little boy toddles, obviously, towards it. For a few months, I've been having a feral cat that comes to my back porch looking for food. I first saw him in October around 6 p.m. when the sun was going down and I had walked to the back door to take a smoke outside. I could see him through the double window that looks out onto the swamp beyond. He was sitting patiently as if he had been waiting for me. His black, greasy fur reflecting the colors of the sun. When he saw me approaching, he stepped closer to the window and stood on his two back legs and started to paw wildly at the window. I chuckled and walked back to my fridge, pulling out some leftover chicken breast from the night before. I grabbed an old plastic dish from the cabinet and I tore the chicken apart into bite-sized pieces. I returned to the back door. I opened it only enough for me to squeeze out so that he wouldn't bolt into the house. If he did, I knew I would regret it, letting him slip inside, only to possibly infest my home with blood-sucking fleas and to tear up my furniture. I placed the dish down, and he pranced towards it, scarfing it down like it was his first meal in weeks. I looked at him closer, through his long fur, and could see how thin he was. His legs looked like skin and bone, and his cheeks looked sunk in, causing his eyes to protrude out grossly. It was then that I noticed his tar-colored eyes that had no glint to them, no shine from the setting sun. It reminded me of those computer screens that don't reflect pesky sunlight glare coming from your window. I felt uneasy, worried now that he may attack me. However, he looked at me once and blinked slowly before racing down the porch stairs and disappearing into the wooded swamp. I started to wake up every morning only to see the dead corpse of some poor animal when I would take my routinely first smoke of the day. It started with little animals, birds, mice, and other small rodents. I always figured it was just the way that cat was thanking me for feeding him when he came, which was only a couple of times a week. Even though I only saw him a few times, there was always a dead animal on the porch step every morning. I thought it was silly that some old cat would bring me presents every morning. After about a month, the corpses began to get bigger. I was finding more bigger rats and the occasional possum. I started to think it was strange that this cat seemed to catch his dinner just fine, but still came to me for scraps. I always brushed it off though, seeing as it wasn't doing me any harm, and I had no roommates who may have been disturbed by it. However, on one particular cold and foggy morning, I walked to the back deck to have my cigarette, and I looked down to look for my present. There was nothing there. I could feel my heart flutter. I was worried that something may have happened to my little buddy. That feeling quickly left, and I felt my stomach drop as I looked over the railing to see my lawn filled with bodies. I placed a hand over my mouth to catch my gasp. The sight was disgusting and a less than pleasant encounter when all I wanted was to enjoy a smoke. After that occurrence, the dead animal started to appear once again on the back deck. Part of me felt relieved that my cat was okay, while the other part of me felt like something was terribly off. Sometime in January, I woke up in the middle of the night, groggy as hell, but with a strong craving to have a smoke. I walked down the hall and paused at the window overlooking the backyard, and I saw a pale figure that reflected the moonlight. I paused, and my eyes widened. Suddenly, I was no longer groggy, and the urge to smoke disappeared. The figure looked up at me, and I froze. My breathing stopped. I could see its sunken-in eyes staring at me, and its spine protruding from its pale skin that had patches of fur peppered. It looked very strange, almost human-like, hunched over while standing on two legs. I panicked, and I could feel my body growing hot as my heartbeat quickened. After staring at me a little longer, it turned around to crawl over the fence, and then it walked away on its two legs. I went back to bed, completely terrified. I woke up the next morning and rubbed my eyes, releasing a big yawn. I thought to myself, what a crazy dream I had. I got up from bed and walked downstairs to make myself a pot of French press coffee. I grabbed my pack of smokes and my mug and walked out the back door. I walked to the rail with my mug and crossed my arms and leaned over. I instantly dropped my mug and could hear it shatter on the concrete below. Time felt like it had slowed as I looked around to see corpses lacerated and splayed across my yard. The black feral cat was strategically in the middle of all the dead bodies. No mercy was spared to any of those animals. I felt my stomach heave, and I threw up what was left of my dinner from last night. I felt a chill run down my spine as I remembered what I had seen the night before, and I no longer believed it was a dream. I quickly walked back to the door and locked it shut behind me. It felt surreal, and I couldn't imagine that this was happening to me, but to my dismay, it was. I couldn't be bothered to clean all the bodies. I was too fearful to walk out that door. I stayed inside the house for the rest of the day on my computer, looking for solutions to my problem. Of course, I found nothing but nonsense about some beings called rakes, wendigos, and skinwalkers. I strongly felt that this was some person playing a massive prank on me, and I desperately wanted to believe that was the case. I fell asleep at the table in front of the back door. Being the light sleeper that I am, I woke up to a gentle but loud knock at the door, followed by a few more. I immediately sprang up and swiveled around. I pulled the blinds away from the door just enough to peer out the window. Nothing. I walked to the window beside the door and shrieked at what I saw before me. The creature I had just seen the night before had pressed its hands and face against the window and was breathing heavily with a wicked smile plastered against its face. I ran to the counter and snatched my keys, running out the front door to dash to my car. As I got in, I began backing out. That's when I saw the creature come around the side of the house, only to stop when it saw me backing away. It then stood up on its two legs and gave me a slow wave, showing off its nasty pointed teeth and its disgusting smile. I retreated to my sister's home, which was about 30 minutes away, and I busted through the front door with no explanation. She came running down the stairs, with her boyfriend following close behind her. She flicked the lights on and could see how disturbed I looked. Taking me to the guest room downstairs, she told me I was welcome to stay as long as I needed. After refusing to tell her what went wrong, I felt crazy after what I saw, part of me still believing it wasn't real, and another part afraid she would think I was crazy. A few days passed, and I was beginning to feel more at ease. My sister was making breakfast by the time I woke up, and I nodded to her and her boyfriend as I sat down at the table when there was a ring at the doorbell. I went to go see who was there, as I saw my sister was busy and her boyfriend was enjoying a little small talk with her. I opened the door and was surprised to see no one was there. A putrid smell struck my nostrils. I looked down to see the half-rotten body of my feral cat. A couple of years ago, I went to a rehab in South California for alcohol and drug addictions. My family and friends were beginning to worry about me a lot, so if anything, I did it more for them than for me. I was there for almost 4 months. We all got pretty close. However, tragedy struck and my roommate decided to hit the needle again. Needless to say, that was the last time he ever would, as he overdosed in his apartment, collapsed in his closet with a needle still in his arm. This is where some friends and I found him, motionless. We called 911 immediately, but it was too late. A few weeks passed, and we are still living in the same apartment that he passed away in. Being sober, and not really knowing what sober people do with their time and lives all day, we did a bunch of random shit to keep our minds off our old habits. On this one specific night, we decided to use a Ouija board. We all sat in the living room and began. We said the prayer, put our hands on the planchette, and started asking routine questions and got nothing. We were about to quit when someone had the brilliant idea of going into our friend's room that passed away. Sitting in the room, we pulled everything out, redid the procedure, and asked for, let's call him Brad. We then asked, Brad, are you still with us? Surprisingly, the planchette went to yes. Both a little freaked out and a little excited, we continued. We then asked simple things like if he was okay, etc. Everything was fine until we asked Brad why he did it. The planchette then went to BADGNE. We thought about this for a while and asked, is Brad gone? The planchette then started moving like I never seen it move before. Z-O-Z-O-Z-O. Over and over again. I had no clue what the fuck this was, but I turned to my friend, and his face was white. When the planchette finally came to a rest, I asked my friend what was wrong. We need to quit. We need to stop this right now. Being a huge tough guy, it was strange to see him so scared. Stop being a pussy, I jokingly said. That's Zozo, a Ouija board demon. He acts to be a friend or family member and then finally reveals himself. I took this in and kind of chuckled to myself. That friend took off and went back to his apartment while the two of us stayed, laughing at the demon and cussing him out. We finally asked what he wanted, and the planchette pointed right at me. Terrified, I asked, what do you want with me? It then started moving to the letters H-E-L-L. You want me in hell? It then moved towards yes. Are you going to kill me? The planchette stayed at yes. Getting a little freaked out, I asked, how are you gonna kill me? It then started moving towards F-I-R-E. And then out of nowhere, the planchette shot towards one of our candles, knocking it onto the floor, starting a small fire on the carpet. We quickly put it out, and as we were doing so, we looked back at the Ouija board, terrified. We picked up the planchette and walked back to the board and said goodbye. And then we went outside to burn that board that same night. I refused to sleep in that apartment after that night, and I ended up relapsing after going back home. So I beg you, don't ever play with a Ouija board. And Zozo, I hope we never meet again. So I never had a Ouija board experience because I was always told to never play with them. But recently, I was at the mall looking for a game called What Do You Mean? As I was looking at the games, I noticed that there were Ouija boards right there with the rest of the games. When out of nowhere, one of the workers comes up to me and says, "Hey, you want a Ouija board? I'll give you 50% off." He seemed very adamant, like your typical salesperson, but something about him just didn't seem right. I don't even know where he came from. It seemed like he just popped up out of nowhere. But he was wearing a worker's uniform, so I assumed he worked there. I responded with, "No thanks, I'm not looking for a Ouija board." And then he just walks away to the back room. I thought it was weird though, because I was looking at the board games, and the Ouija boards were about 3-4 feet away from me. And to finish it off, the Ouija boards were like 30 plus, and I didn't see a 50% off sign anywhere. The whole situation was weird. I mean, I did have enough money if they were 50% off, but still, I wasn't looking for a Ouija board. I needed this What Do You Mean game to play with my family. As I got the game that I was looking for, I went to the cashier to check out, and as I was walking out the store, I didn't see that employee that had told me about the 50% off. I turned back, and I saw him. He was just standing at the back of the store, looking at me. in a real creepy way. Once I got home, I told my family about the whole situation at the store, and a few of them said that it was most likely the devil or a demon trying to get me to buy it. It's weird, I know, but I wanted to share the story with everyone to see what everyone thinks about this and what you would have done in this situation. This story happened on October of 2004, back when I was still a third-year high school student. My friends and I stuck around the school late at night after having our annual Halloween party. We had agreed to try out my friend's Ouija board. It wasn't the brightest idea, but we needed a thrill. We found a nice spot under a huge tree and proceeded with our half-assed ritual. It was a total of 5 of us, 2 boys and 3 girls, and we were expecting some kind of paranormal contact. Rumors had it that our school was haunted, but we never really experienced anything firsthand, and it was Halloween when all the spirits came out to play, so we all wanted to get spooked. Also, we never seen a Ouija board firsthand before, so we were pretty excited. Our school was an old Spanish colonial house, built in the 1800s when the Spaniards still occupied the Philippines. We were in a section of the school that doesn't get used often, located beside a creepy old Jesuit house. People only go there when they needed to use the restroom, store equipment on one of the sheds, or make out with their boyfriend or girlfriends. We sat down in the middle of an open space, with only an exposed light nearby illuminating the surroundings. We were all having a laugh, scaring each other with what-if scenarios. It was your typical dumb kids doing dumb things. My friend who brought the Ouija board then placed it in the middle of our circle. If I remember correctly, it was the glow-in-the-dark one, which we found hilarious. But it gave us the chance to see what was in the dark. Not knowing what to do, and going after what we seen in the movies, we all then began to place our index finger. We sat there looking at each other, until one of us said, okay, what's next? We didn't know if there was a proper way to start the ritual. Plus, the board didn't come with instructions, so we decided to just throw in a question. Is anyone there? I called out into the darkness. If there are spirits living here, please talk to us. One of the girls joined in. We obviously had no idea what we were doing. Still, nothing. Not even the slightest bit of wind. One of my friends jerked the planchette, and the girl who brought the Ouija board screamed, breaking the silence. We all laughed at how ridiculous it was. After a bit of joking around, we decided to give it another chance. We all placed our index fingers on the planchette once more and asked, if there's anyone there, we would like to make contact. Don't break the circle, one of my friends jokingly said. Shut up, I whispered. We were just about ready to give up when the wind started to pick up. The stillness broke and the darkness around us seemed to move. Just a coincidence, we thought. Okay, but don't break the circle, I told everybody. Is anyone there? I was actually pretty excited. It was like a scene from a movie with dirt and leaves swirling around us. Guys, I'm scared, my friend sitting beside me said. My mom warned me about playing with forces we don't know. Did you die here? Were you killed during the war? Are you the headless priest? Do you know Jose Rizal? Are you a hottie? My friend giggled. At this point, we were all throwing random stupid questions, but nothing. This is bullshit. I don't want to do this anymore, my friend said. We were all thinking the same as well. Just then, a group of dogs from the neighboring house started barking at us through the chain link fence. These 6 dogs were growling and showing teeth. We all screamed and without finishing the ritual, ran right out of there. We didn't see each other until after Halloween break, and this is where the story gets creepy. One of the girls told us about an experience she had the night after playing with the Ouija board. She said she got home late after hanging out with her friends from the neighborhood when she realized she forgot the keys to her house. So she called her brother up, who was then still sharing a room with her, and what he said creeped her out. He told her that she was already home. He claimed to have seen her walk in a while ago, and that she looked really tired and saw her head straight to bed. Creepy, but no need to freak ourselves out, was what we thought at least. Besides, her brother must have been tired and seeing things. But then my other friend started telling us about an encounter she had that Halloween night. She said she was going up her room when the lights started flickering as she was ascending the staircase. Typical horror movie visuals. After this, she said she saw the door to her room open and a dark figure stepped out and stood atop of their staircase. She couldn't make out the face of the figure, but she said that she couldn't move and she felt a horrible dread as the figure stared down at her. No way, my best friend who just joined the conversation said in disbelief. Something happened to me as well. He recalled that he was sleeping one night when he woke up feeling really uncomfortable. He described his vision as having TV-like static and a feeling of heaviness surrounded him. He looked around the room and that's when he saw a bloody, charred face with red eyes grinning at him through the window. I couldn't believe what I was hearing because, in reality, I had an almost run-in with something that night as well. After the ritual, I was sleeping in our sedan on the way home after fooling around with the Ouija board when I felt our car jerk. I woke up instantly. Looking out the window, I found out that we had been hit by a huge oil tanker. I panicked and leaped out of the car. But lucky for me, my mom and I survived the crash, since the front of the car was a total wreck. I still don't have an explanation why those things happened to us, but thank God nothing happened after that. And ever since that day, I have never played or gone near a Ouija board, ever since. Most people, when they tell stories of Ouija boards, it's when something terrible happens, like a demon possessing a friend, or somehow a ghost begins to haunt someone's home. Yet my story is kind of different. I'll start off with saying that this happened when I was in 9th grade. My friend had gotten a Ouija board for her birthday from her cousin, and my friends and I were dying to play. We told our friend, who I'll name Catherine for the sake of the story, to wait until we all got together to play the board. Our parents then drove us over to Catherine's house on a Friday after school so we could hang out and spend the night. None of us told our parents about what we were planning to do, since all of us came from strict religious backgrounds. We ate dinner and we also got in our pool, then got out the rules for the board and we set everything up. The door had been shut, the ceiling fan was turned on full speed to drown out our questions, and we were all excited about what we were about to experience. There were 4 of us there, including me, Catherine, Jackie, and Beth. We sat in a tight circle around the board, and we all nervously set our hands on the planchette. Beth greeted the spirit who owned the board once we touched it, and we all started giggling. None of us really believed in spirits, so we weren't too worried about the planchette, quote, moving, or something in the room breaking. The first question was asked by Jackie, who asked if there was anyone there. The planchette didn't move, and again my friends and I started laughing. Catherine then asked the question, "What is your name?" Suddenly, the planchette started sliding across the board. We were all freaked out, and Jackie even screamed. Catherine started asking who was moving the piece. She got kind of angry and started watching the planchette with disgust on her face. MARTHABANKS. Suddenly, we turned to see Catherine shocked, and a horrified look was painted on her face. Beth started laughing and asked how we came up with a name that quick, following with the question, how old were you? 6, 1. Jackie and I noticed that Catherine had started to cry, very silently, but she was close to sobbing, big tears falling down her face. How are you today? She asked through tears. Beth had now noticed Catherine's sadness too. I asked her what was going on and why she was so sad, but she didn't answer. G-O-O-D. Catherine laughed a little bit, then asked if heaven was nice. All four of us stared at the board, unmoving our hands from the piece. The planchette slowly spelled out ITSBEAUTIFUL. Catherine quickly said goodbye, without any of our consent, before removing her hands from the piece, pulling ours away with hers. The rest of the night she didn't speak of the incident, no matter how many times we asked. Years later, when I was in 12th grade, I had called her up after not speaking to her in a while. I was still friends with Beth, and I had gotten way out of touch with Jackie. I still spoke with Catherine, but not as often as I used to. She had moved away, and she wasn't available to call much. So I finally got her attention one day, and brought up the night where we played her Ouija board, and asked if she still had the board. She told me that she had asked her mom to sell it, since it was taking up space in their storage closet. Yet, Catherine sent another text that got me very curious. Oh, wait, was that the day I got super upset? I texted back to confirm her question, and asked her why she was so sad. I now know that Martha Banks was her grandmother, who got a stroke when she was 53, another when she was 57, and the last one when she was 61, which killed her in a couple of days. I know it's a very touchy subject, but Catherine has said that she was almost certain that it was her grandmother. One of the reasons being that a couple of days after all of us had come over, she walked out to the kitchen to get a snack and saw that a picture had fallen down in the living room. When she went to go pick it up, she noticed that all of the pictures that were originally in the room were still there, and that the picture didn't have a frame. She then told me that as soon as she picked up the picture, tears poured from her face. The picture was one of her and her grandmother when she was a little baby. She had never seen it before. This memory always makes me go on the side of Ouija boards when someone says that you shouldn't play. Of course, there are dangers, but taking a risk can allow you to learn a lot of things. And this memory, for Catherine, I think, will allow her to remember that her grandma is safe and happy for all of her days. I don't know my birthday. The date on my ID card, July 3rd, 1922, was invented by an Army enlistment officer. When I told him I don't know my birthday. The date on my ID card, July 3rd, 1922, was invented by an Army enlistment officer. When I told him that I didn't know how old I was. I'm sure my mom knew, but she died before I could ask her. I would imagine it was written down in the family Bible, but that was destroyed in the fire. As for my pa, I don't recall him ever being sober enough to remember, if he ever knew at all. Never got no cakes or presents growing up. I don't think I'm over 100, but regardless, I don't have much time left. There's a story that I need to tell before I pass on. A story from when I was very young. I better start at the beginning. I was born in the Smoky Mountains on the Tennessee-North Carolina border, in a place called Blackberry Hollow. I was the youngest of 3 children. Had a brother named Jack and a sister named Mabel. Would have been more children, but my ma died giving birth to her fourth, along with the baby, a girl named Sarah. We had a small farm, about 40 acres or so, planted corn mainly, along with some turnip, potatoes, and greens. Kept a few hogs and dairy cows too. Weren't prosperous by any means. No one in the valley was. Wasn't easy farming on account of the rocky soil, but we did alright. Not from farming. My pa was too drunk most of the time to properly tend to his fields. But he did tend his still, hidden back on an isolated mountain top, so no revenuer would ever find it. Lived about 3 miles from the town center. Wasn't much of a town. 2 churches, one a missionary Baptist church, and the other a primitive Baptist church. Which one we went to depended on the fancies of the woman my pa was currently courting. Couldn't tell you the differences between the two. The sermons always seemed to be about the various reasons you were going to hell for eternity. There was also a general store, which I never stepped foot in, best I can recollect. Didn't learn how to read and write till much later. And that was it for the town. As I said, it wasn't much. The town is now long gone. The government bought it up to form the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Heard that some of the buildings survived. Can't confirm that. Never been back to check. And never will, after what happened there. Now, as you can probably imagine, there wasn't no doctor in the town. The nearest would have been a good 30 miles away in the county seat. That would be a day's journey at least, over narrow mountain roads. No one had any cars in the valley back then, for even if they could afford them, there was no way for them to traverse the rocky path. So what you did when you were ill was go see the witch, Ma McDermott. Now, Ma McDermott looked like a hag from a fairy tale. She was nothing but skin and bones, her skin so thin and pulled so taut that it looked like her skull would burst through at any moment. Her bony fingers seemed to be twice the length of a normal man's and were capped with long, pointy, yellow nails. She walked stooped over, with the help of a hickory stick nearly twice her height. Strangest of all were her eyes, pale yellow like a daffodil. It was rumored that she was over 200, and I believed it. She had a small shack back in the woods behind the general store. Here she saw her patients. She could set a fracture, dispense a herbal remedy for morning sickness or the ague, and rub a salve on a burn. She knew some midwifery. In many ways, she was like the hundreds of other folk healers who practice in the mountain towns. But she was rumored to have a dark secret. There was an abandoned grist mill deep in the woods, probably about 5 miles from the family farm. It was said that there, Ma McDermott practiced black magic, seance with evil spirits, and even called forth the devil. All of the children of the hollow knew to avoid that place. My pa, who given his near constant state of inebriation, didn't teach me much of nothing, warned me multiple times to avoid the old mill, and I listened, until one night. It all started the day my brother Jack died. Believe it was March, for I remember the fields were aflame, the farmers burning them to clear out the weeds and debris prior to the first planting. Jack and I were playing hide and seek. I was still counting down when I heard screams coming from the silo. I ran over and saw Jack up to his waist in grain, his arms flailing, being sucked down like it was quicksand. A few seconds later, he was completely submerged. My pa told me to run to a neighboring farm to get some help. He, along with 3 other men, spent hours scooping out the corn until they pulled out my brother. His body looked so peaceful, like he was asleep. But even as a young boy, no more than 5 or 6, I knew he was dead. I never recall seeing my pa cry, but he was clearly grieving. He became catatonic, lying in bed all day, not getting up except to get more whiskey. It was up to Mabel and me to feed the hogs, milk the cows. We should have been plowing, getting ready to plant, but we were too young to do that by ourselves. Finally, about a week after the accident, my pa finally got up. I remember riding into town, dressed all in black. I don't remember the service, but I remember the burial. As the preacher man was reading some psalm, I heard footsteps behind me. I looked behind and saw Mom McDermott standing right behind me, grinning from ear to ear, like a mad woman. Before I could scream, she vanished into the thin air. Later that afternoon, I decided to go fishing, hoping to get the image of the witch out of my mind. Just had a little bamboo pole, but I was determined to catch a nice big rainbow trout and bring it home for dinner, hoping that it would cheer Pa up. I fished for hours, going downstream further than I ever had. All I got was a few nibbles. I sat back empty-handed, taking what I thought was a shortcut through the woods. The darkness snuck upon me, and I soon realized I was hopelessly lost. The temperature was dropping rapidly, as it does in the mountains, and I had on just a thin coat. I kept walking aimlessly, praying that I would find my way, when in the distance, I saw a little bit of golden light. I ran towards it. As I got closer, I realized it was an old mill, the big water wheel having split right into two. Freezing, I began to run to the door, when what I saw through one of the windows stopped me in my tracks. Propped up in a chair was my brother. The top of his skull cleanly sliced off and set down on a long wooden table in front of him. Also, in the table were various vats containing chemicals of different colors, copper wires running between them. Floating in one of them was a brain. Presiding over this macabre spectacle was Ma McDermott. I tried to run, but my body was paralyzed. I watched Ma McDermott remove the brain and set it back into my brother's skull. Nothing happened for several seconds. But then, suddenly, my brother's eyes opened wide. But they weren't his eyes. They were demon eyes. Devil eyes. Somehow, they radiated evil. Pure evil. Ma McDermott looked up at me. The same grin on her face that she had at the burial. She started cackling. I ran. I didn't know which direction I was headed. I just ran. Away from the mill. Away from the witch. I kept running, even though my legs had long ago given out. Even though my heart was pounding harder than I knew it could. Never once looked behind me, for I knew I would see the witch riding her hickory stick, cackling, grinning from ear to ear. Eventually, after what seemed like hours, I came out onto the main road that led from the town to my farm. I didn't take a rest, but kept running, all the way back to the farm. My sister was at the door, crying. I hugged her for the last time and went upstairs and tried to wake my pa, but he was passed out from the drink. I told my sister that Mom McDermott was after us, what I saw, but she didn't believe me and went to bed. I made sure that all the doors and windows were locked and got my pa's hunting rifle out. I sat by the front door, the gun, which would have been too heavy for me to aim, resting on my lap. I must have fallen asleep, for I awoke to my pa shaking me. He picked me up and rushed us outside before running back in for my sister. As I sat in the cold night air, I saw, from the light of the burning house, a figure walking stiffly towards the pines, moving like he was hewn from wood. In his right hand was a torch, still ablaze. Despite the distance, I knew who it was, my brother. A few seconds later, I saw my pa running outside, carrying the body of my sister. She was dead. My pa said it was a rival moonshiner who set his house alight, but I knew the truth. I never told him. If he lived longer, I might have, but he took his life a few weeks later. I watched them walk outside calmly one morning, carrying a rifle. I watched as he put it in his mouth and pulled the trigger. I was sent to live with one of my pa's brothers, who was the foreman at a textile mill in Asheville. For years, I had nightmares that Mom McDermott, or my brother, or what was once him, would show up in the night at my window to snatch me away, but they never came. For my whole life, I have wondered what was Mom McDermott doing with my brother's corpse, what her motive was. I have never come up with any satisfactory answers. I just hope that when my time comes, I will be in heaven with my mom and pa, with Jack and Mabel and little Sarah. I pray every day that I will not end up in hell with the devil and with Mom McDermott, the witch of Blackberry Hollow. Sleep paralysis has always been a large part of my life. Even as a kid, I remember trying to describe to my parents that the nightmares I was having were all too real, and that figures had actually been showing up in my room. Like any parent dismissing their kid's overactive imagination, they told me I was always safe no matter what I saw and got me a nightlight. That, however, made the illusions I would see in my helpless, half-asleep state even worse, as I could make out more of their terrifying features. After some years of dealing with it, I began to realize I was dealing with one sleep paralysis demon that would take the form of anything my mind found terrifying on a given day. One characteristic that defined it was distorted details and concepts to make them just unfamiliar enough to be terrifying, as if it couldn't perfectly replicate its desired form. For example, if I watched the documentary about a serial killer before going to bed, We All Done It, it would take the form of a human being with a knife, but with eyes larger than normal and long fingers to push these visions into the realm of the uncanny. It knew exactly what to do to make me wake with a start every morning. However, as I got older, it began to run out of ideas. The things I once found scary growing up no longer terrified me, and I had been exposed to horrible things in life that had left me with a sense of emptiness. I no longer felt the emotion, happiness, sadness, and particularly fear. This really pissed the demon off, as night after night it took on new and horrible forms to try to draw out that same terrified look in my eyes it had savored for years before. But I simply had no emotion to give. I was dead inside, and blocking out the demon was just a small benefit of a horrible situation. Eventually, I think it gave up. It would take the form of a tall, blurry humanoid figure, just standing in the corner of my room, once again, with eyes and limbs slightly longer and wider than that of a man. It would simply stand there during my sleep paralysis episodes until I woke up again. A more empathetic person might have almost felt bad. Life continued like this until I met Sarah. I accidentally took the coffee she ordered instead of mine at a cafe, and what should have been a brief, awkward interaction turned into a first date. She was everything I wasn't. Lively, bubbly, and positive wouldn't even begin to describe this woman. She brought the light and energy back to my life, and I began to experience the emotions that had been buried under the weight of my depression again. My demon took notice, and once again began attempts to draw out the more negative emotions. However, I now had a different kind of shield against it. I had never been happier with Sarah, and with that, I felt the courage to not be afraid of it anymore. That brought on its rage more so than I had ever seen before. It went all out, making me believe someone had broken into my apartment, or getting up directly in my face with the most hideous and disturbing forms you could imagine, while I lay there paralyzed. But I didn't care. This was the first time in years I had felt truly happy, and nothing could get in the way of that. I would usually fall asleep before her, so I would often wake up to a text from her from the night before. One of those nights, we finally talked about her staying over for the first time. We were both really excited, but also sort of nervous. We agreed for her to just spend one night at my place tomorrow night. I fell asleep that night, thinking about how amazing it would be to fall asleep and wake up next to Sarah. However, a few hours later, I woke up to a familiar feeling. Every limb so heavy that I was unable to move, slight tightness in my chest, just another bout of sleep paralysis. I glanced up at whatever horrible vision my demon had prepared for me. Its slender and stretched frame stood at the end of my bed, motionless. Its disproportional eyes weren't set on me. They were on my phone. Although I couldn't move my head, I could tell Sarah was still texting me, from the faint glow of the screen turning on and off. A sudden chill ran down my spine as it slowly turned its head to me while developing a sinister grin that almost seemed to run off its face. The idea of that thing even recognizing what those texts meant made my blood run cold. That horrible vision ended, and I woke up the next morning with a start. Did it understand why I wasn't afraid of it anymore? The thought of Sarah becoming the target of its terror made me pause at the idea of her spending the night. However, I quickly brushed it off. I was quickly falling in love with this woman, and no imaginary sleep monster was going to get in the way of that. I had never slept better than the night she stayed over. Perfect blissful sleep. No sleep paralysis or horrible visions. Just pure peace. I should have known it was too good to be true. Sarah started texting me less. When we went on dates or I talked to her, she looked and sounded more tired than usual. She became less enthusiastic and outgoing, canceling plans because she was simply too tired to go. I thought it was something I had done. Maybe we moved too fast in having her stay over. Those thoughts alone began to throw me back into a depressive spiral. But there was no sleep paralysis to follow them. The demon seemed to be gone, completely absent. It was as if it had packed up and left my life for good. It didn't take me long to see where it had gone. Sarah completely broke off contact with me in the weeks following, and according to her sister, she fell into a deep depressive state. She talked about experiencing vivid nightmares when she fell asleep, with hallucinations seemingly tailored to exploit her every fear. When asked to describe some of them, a trend in each struck me: exaggerated features, long stretched out limbs, large wide eyes. I had dumped my burden on her, and she was not equipped to handle it in the way I was. The news of Sarah taking her own life shattered me. She had apparently left a note, ranting about nightmares and visions of a sleep paralysis demon haunting her dreams. After that, it returned to me, only now it had a new, favorite form to make every moment of sleep a waking nightmare. Number 1. The Midnight Game. The Midnight Game is said to be an ancient pagan ritual that was used as a punishment for those who disobeyed the gods. It involves summoning the Midnight Man and avoiding him from midnight until 3:33 a.m. Anyone who has played this game advises against it, as most of them have walked away with long-lasting mental trauma at best. This game has one of the highest stakes of any on this list, so if the rest of these aren't terrifying enough for you, take a look and see what's involved with summoning the Midnight Man. To play the game, you'll need the following: a candle, matches, salt, paper and pen, a wooden door, and lastly, a drop of your own blood. To invite the Midnight Man into your home, write down your name and add the drop of blood to the piece of paper. Now turn off every light in the house and place the lit candle and the paper in front of a wooden door. Knock on the door 22 times, with the final knock when the clock chimes at 12 a.m. Open the door and then blow out the candle and close the door again. Relight your candle immediately. With that, the game has started. You have until 3:33 a.m. to avoid the Midnight Man as he hunts for you in the dark. Signs he is near include whispering sounds, drops in temperature, and most importantly, the candle flickering or going out. If it does, you must relight it within 10 seconds and then surround yourself in a salt circle, which you must remain until the game ends at 3:33 a.m. But what happens if he catches you? Well, according to those that have played, he'll either trap you inside or rip out your internal organs one by one. So whatever you do, don't get caught. Actually, it's probably best if you don't play this game at all. You have been warned. Number 2, Three Kings. The Three Kings game comes to us from the always unsettling No Sleep subreddit. In order to participate, you need to set up 2 mirrors that face each other, with a chair placed in the middle. Lastly, you'll need a lit candle. This chair is your throne, making you the king. The mirrors are your queen and your fool, although you may not know which is which. At exactly 3:30 a.m., you are to sit on the chair with the candle lit, facing a mirror. Hold the candle and stare into the darkness. The game has begun. The purpose of this game is to transport your consciousness to another dimension. Many players have reported having conversations with themselves in an honest and introspective manner. They gain the ability to look at their past and present. Others have claimed that this is a ritual that will induce a lucid dream. Either way, if you are interested in staying up all night, meditating, this may be the game for you. Just remember, whatever secrets you may learn will stay with you long after the game has ended, be they good or bad. Number 3, the Closet Game. The Closet Game's sole purpose is to summon a demon into your home. To play, stand in your closet with an unlit match and utter the phrase, "Show me the light or leave me in the darkness." At this point, you should hear a faint whisper. As soon as you hear it, light the match you have in your hand. This is important because if you fail to light your match in time, it's said the demon will pull you into a pit of eternal darkness. If you do light the match, open your closet door and slowly step out into the room. Congratulations, now your closet is haunted by a demon. It's recommended that from now on, you never look inside your closet without a light. It's also rumored that if by chance you leave your closet door open at night, you'll see the demon watching you from inside, with red eyes that glow like matches. Number 4, One Man Hide and Seek. One Man Hide and Seek is based on an old ritual that is said to summon the dead. The folklore that surrounds this game involves restless, wandering spirits which are said to endlessly search for bodies to possess. You are to summon such a spirit by offering it a doll instead of a human host. While this game can have some seriously creepy ramifications, it takes a lot of preparation before play can commence. First, take a doll and empty out the stuffing. Fill it with rice, along with a piece of your fingernail or hair, and sew it closed again with a red thread. Put the doll in a tub filled with water, then turn off all the lights. Fill your mouth with salt water and go back to the tub where the doll should have disappeared. Begin searching your house, remembering to keep all the lights off. this game must take place in the dark. One man hide and seek can only end once you have found the doll. Pour the salt water into your mouth on it. Wait until dry, then burn and discard the remains to complete the ritual. Of course, it's probably easier to just play this with a friend. But if you are really craving some seriously spooky hide and seek, then this should do just fine. Number 5. Dry bones. If hide and seek with a doll seems too soft for you, then you might be interested in this game. Dry bones is hide and seek against a demon, and the stakes are much higher if you lose the game. First, make sure you have a candle and a match. At 12:01 a.m., go to your bathroom and stare at your mirror. Light the candle with your match, let the match burn out on its own, and then say the words, "I am aware of your presence, and I welcome you into my home. Come now." What happens next? You run as fast as you can and hide. To survive the game, you must remain hidden. To end the game, wait until 3 a.m. to go to the largest room in your home. Say the following: "Thank you for playing, but you must leave now. You are no longer welcome." At this point, you should hear a groaning sound, which means the demon has consented. Legend says, if you survive, you will be rewarded with a prize of your choosing. If you lose, you'll get a fate more terrible than we can describe here. So whatever you do, don't lose. Number 6. Elevator to another world. The belief in the supernatural importance of elevators has its origins in Korea, where it is said you can travel to another world, possibly to a parallel universe, using a specific combination on an elevator. To experiment with this, make sure you go to a building with at least 10 floors and are alone in the elevator. Press the buttons 4, 2, 6, 2, 4, 5 in that order and begin your ascent. On the 5th floor, a woman will enter the elevator with you. Make sure you don't look straight at her or talk to her, just like any elevator ride. After she enters, press the 1st floor button. The elevator will then ignore your command, taking you to the 10th floor instead. Once you reach the 10th floor, exit the elevator into another world. If the woman asks where you are going, don't answer her. To exit the world, get on the same elevator and use the same combination. Number 7. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary is one of the most famous paranormal games in existence. We all heard the urban legend based upon the bloody reign of Mary Tudor, or Mary Worth, the child murderer. But have you actually tried it? The objective is to summon her spirit, much like the closet game. This game should only be tried if you plan on moving out shortly. To summon Bloody Mary, stand in a dark room in front of a mirror with a lit candle and say her name 3 times. Mary should then appear behind you, covered in blood. Since her spirit is thought to be malicious, encounters are said to be violent and possibly deadly. If you fancy putting the legend to the test, you may want to read true accounts by people who play these games and live to tell the tale before you give it a go. I am aware of your presence, and I welcome you into my home. Come now. This happened not too long after I turned 18 years old. My girlfriend had also just turned 18 a few days ago. This meant that her parents finally trusted her and I to be alone in the house while they went out for dinner. My girlfriend had always been a fan of scary movies and creepy things in general. She loved reading creepypastas and watching dark and gory films such as Hostel and Saw. On one night, I was sitting with her while she finished watching the last few minutes of The Human Centipede. We both had a few drinks and I was about to go to bed, but then she said that we should look for other scary movies. Despite my tiredness, I went ahead with her recommendation. A few minutes of searching on her laptop, the screen revealed all her favorite online film sites, and it showed that they had been taken down. That's when she suggested a chilling alternative. "Have you ever heard of the dark web?" she asked. I had actually heard whispers around school about it, but never took much interest. "Of course I have," I replied, trying to act brave. A smile of excitement appeared on her face. I could tell she was slightly drunk and in that sort of "I don't care what happens" kind of mood. I decided to go to the kitchen to fetch her some water. When I came back, I noticed she had a site open called Sensor View. This site showed the pictures of movie posters I had never seen before. I correctly assumed it was a site that sold banned horror films from other countries. All of them looked pretty unoriginal, nothing I hadn't seen before, except for one that caught my attention. The one my girlfriend was hovering over the mouse clicker. It was over a movie that was called The Visiting. The display picture was simply a white background with The Visiting written in Arial black font. We were both fascinated as to what it was, so I took my iPhone and searched for the plot of the film, but I didn't find anything, just a few stupid YouTube videos. However, when I looked back up from my phone, I caught a glimpse of my girlfriend typing in her name and address into various boxes on a page titled Order Details. I was shocked as she clicked the submit button. I shouted at her, explaining how dangerous it was, dispersing her personal details into such a fucked up place as the dark web. I could see my attempts to correct her were useless, as the alcohol was hitting her hard and she was not paying attention whatsoever. Frustrated, I went to bed, deciding to talk to her about this the next morning. The next morning she seemed to have little regret over her actions. She spent the morning explaining how she was curious and she was in no danger. She even said that the experience would be fun. However, I wasn't convinced. She told me not to tell her parents, fearing that they would not trust her to be alone in the house again. So I promised not to say anything and I headed back home. 3 days later, I was visiting her house again. Her parents had gone to meet with some friends from work for a drink, and we were watching The Exorcist on DVD. While the movie was playing, my girlfriend began joking about how horrified I looked a few days ago when we were discussing the dark web. She then said that she had only received a fairly professional looking email confirming the order and nothing else. I began to yield to her argument. Perhaps I was overreacting. It was seconds after our conversation finished when we hear what sounds like an aggressive knock coming from the door. It sounded like it was from 2 doors, but I dismissed this as an echo. I guess I began to look concerned because my girlfriend began laughing once again at the look of terror on my face. I put on a fake smile as I walked towards the door. However, it completely erased from my face when I saw who was standing outside. A tall, stocky man wearing a ski mask and black, dark clothes, standing at the front door with a hammer. I was about to call out to my girlfriend to call the police when I heard a scream echo through the house. I raced back into the room to see my girlfriend pointing at the window facing the garden. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand and we ran up the stairs. We hid in the master bedroom as I was calling the police on my mobile phone, and they advised they would be there as soon as possible. As I finished the phone call, I heard one of the doors smash and loud, rapid footsteps heading up the stairs. They were in the house. Without thinking, I pushed the window open and told my girlfriend to jump, run, and not look back. She jumped and landed safely onto the garden below us. I was about to follow, but hesitated, wondering if I could put up a fight, and in doing so, allowing my girlfriend more time to escape. It was then that I heard a deep, aggressive voice just outside the room. The man shouted something in a foreign language as I heard laughing from two other men outside. All courage and bravery that I was thinking of evaporated, and I jumped, landing harshly on my ankle. The adrenaline racing around my body allowed me to power through the pain, and I eventually caught up to my girlfriend. We were running for what seemed like hours, but actually, it was most likely 10 minutes. We ended up next to the local park, a safe distance away from the house. My girlfriend began sobbing, and I tried to comfort her, trying to avoid my own desire to break down. It was not long after that when the police called me on my cell phone. They were at the house, and as far as they could tell, the attackers were gone. After taking a few minutes to compose ourselves, my girlfriend and I made our way back. There were 3 officers at the house. One was examining each room for any damage or evidence left by the men. One was comforting my girlfriend, while the other was asking me questions. With everything that just happened, I was shocked, and my memory was clouded. I was only able to tell them a few details about their clothing, and the fact that they spoke in what seemed like a European language. My girlfriend then handed over her phone and computer for the police to investigate. They advised us to tell the homeowners of the situation, lock up, and that everyone spend the rest of the evening with friends or a relative. So we both spent the night at my parents' house, while my girlfriend's parents stayed with friends. I remember my girlfriend crying over the phone while telling them about the situation, and so her parents became furious. A few days later, the police visited my girlfriend, and it was by luck that I was at her house that afternoon. They said that their investigations had led them to some disturbing finding. It turned out that the visiting was a nickname that locals in a small Polish town gave to a number of brutal murders that occurred in the 90s in the local area. These murders were committed by an unknown gang and were initially dismissed as home invasions gone wrong. All the victims were found dead in their homes, even though nothing of value was taken from the house. It was only about 2 years after the killings began that a family survived an attack by the gang. The husband was able to give the Polish police a few details of the attackers, but all that he revealed was that they were all wearing a ski mask, had blunt objects, and one had a video camera. However, the crucial evidence was that one of the attackers had dropped a backpack containing one blank videotape and 3 other tapes with content on them. The 3 tapes showed the horrific murders of the other victims of the attackers. The police came to a shocking conclusion that these men were creating snuff films to be sold to whatsoever sickos paid enough for them. A nationwide manhunt began, but after years of investigations, nothing was found. I remember feeling incredibly cold as the police told me their findings. They went on to tell me that the men most likely fled Poland during the police search, and that they could possibly have entered the UK as workers when Poland joined the European Union. The only thing they know for certain was that these men were operating once again. This was the first time in decades after their last murder, and that they were now using the dark web as a way of deciding on their next victims.
The police told my girlfriend's family to move in with a relative while the investigation was ongoing. It was not long after that when my girlfriend broke up with me by her parents' wishes. I assumed her parents suspected me of forcing her into using the dark web, but my girlfriend later discovered that various documents containing information about her had been taken from the house. I'm not allowed to see her anymore, even though our parents still speak. From what they have told me though, is that her mental state has become incredibly fragile. It broke my heart to hear about this. I can safely say that the police will most likely never find the attackers using the information I gave. This means that they will most likely strike again. I can only hope that next time they do, it will lead to those bastards ending up behind bars and not the creation of another tape to add to their collection. So please be safe and avoid the dark web.
Some people have a normal job, Monday through Friday, 40 hours a week, health benefits, bonuses each year, retirement funds. But not me. I don't have a normal job. It's not easy doing what I do, but it pays the bills since I can't get a regular job due to my criminal record. You see, I am a janitor that works for the dark web, and I clean up murder rooms once the buyers are done torturing and killing the victims they paid for. I've been doing it for the past 3 years. Every time someone needs help cleaning up the bloody mess they made, I go in and clean up. I make sure there's not a single drop of blood in the room and dispose of the leftover body parts any way I can. No evidence remaining, no questions asked. In fact, I can never ask any questions. These people cannot be fucked with. I just get paid to do my job and go home like nothing. It's a sick job, but they pay me very good money. But all that would change one night when I started to finally question my morals. It was one night when they called me to do a job. It's always at the same location, which is 40 miles from where I live, in a rundown warehouse. On this specific day, I was called to clean up a room, which really wasn't a problem. As I was cleaning the room that was covered in blood, I saw a small picture on the floor. I picked it up, and it was a picture of a little girl, maybe around 14 years old. This made me think right away that this was maybe the victim's blood, who I was cleaning up just now. It gave me an uneasy feeling inside, and for the first time kind of disturbed me, just for the fact that these people are now using kids as their victims. But again, this was a job where no questions are asked. I put the picture in my pocket and I continued cleaning. Once I was done, I packed up my things and quickly got out the warehouse. I went inside my car and instantly I got a phone call. It was them. They always call me private. I answered and they asked me if I was done cleaning up. I told them yes and that I just got into my vehicle. They then told me that they left the money inside my glove compartment while I was inside cleaning, and that they'll have another job for me in the next 2 days since they have a customer who's already waiting. I knew I shouldn't have done this, but I decided to ask how old she was, referring to the victim. They hanged up the call. I'm sure they got pissed off by me asking. I didn't know if I could continue doing these type of jobs anymore, but I didn't know how else I would get out of this without some possible threat to my life. I got the picture of the little girl and put it resting on the passenger side. I went home that night, contemplating everything. It was the next day around 9 o'clock at night when I got a private call. I knew it was them. I was tempted not to answer, but I did. They gave me the same location again and told me to be there around 4 o'clock a.m. This time,
no questions asked. Juan Miguel Santos of 3905 North 16th Street. The call hanged up. This was a clear threat, just to do my job and get out of there. I would need to leave town the next morning and disappear after this. I arrived at the location and saw there was an old Grand Marquis parked outside. Usually, there shouldn't be any cars but mine at the location, and got worried that maybe these people are keeping a close eye on me. I stepped outside my car and walked slowly inside, feeling more and more paranoid with each step I took. The hallways were darker than before, and I saw light coming from the room I was supposed to go in. I entered inside, and my eyes couldn't believe what they had just seen. There was a girl in the middle of the room, tied up and gagged to a chair, alive. The job wasn't done yet, but then I saw the body of a man laying right next on the floor, next to the girl. The girl looked to be around 16 years old. The girl began to scream at me, and I started freaking out even more. I ran to the man on the floor and checked his pulse. He was gone. This was the man that was going to kill this girl, since I saw a scalpel on his right hand. I walked outside into the hallway and immediately got a call. Private. It was them. Is everything okay? They knew something was up. They also had cameras in the hallways, but not in the rooms. They must have seen that I was nervous. Yes, everything's okay. Finish the job and get out. We'll leave the money in your car. They hanged up, but I knew they knew something was wrong. I went back inside the room, and the girl was yelling at me to help her with the gag in her mouth. I didn't know what to do. I needed to dispose of her body, but that meant that I needed to kill her first. I looked around inside the man's bag, and he had several weapons and tools inside, presumably to use to torture the girl. I pulled out a power drill and turned it on. The girl started to scream even more, telling me to stop. She was crying her eyes out. I aimed the power drill at her face, and more tears started to run down her face. I took off her gag and asked her what happened. She told me that the man just fell on the floor and seemed like he had a heart attack. You know that I can't let you out of here. These are dangerous people, and there are cameras everywhere inside this building. We both looked around the room. What about him? The girl asked. I looked at the man and saw he had a hoodie. I took it off and gave it to the girl. Put this on and cover yourself and run as far as you can away from here. I'm scared. What if they find me? The girl said. I looked inside the man's pockets and found some car keys. They must have been for the car that was parked outside. Here, take the keys. I think the car that's parked outside is his. Whatever you do, do not go to the police. They will find you and they will kill you. Just go as far away from here as you can. Before she left, I asked her for her name, and she said it was Crystal and that she was 17 years old. I was scared for her. I know they might have been outside waiting for me to finish. Before she stepped outside, I looked around the parking lot to see if it was clear for her to go. There were only but 2 cars outside, and she quickly ran to the Marquise. She said thank you and took off. I went back inside and quickly got all my things. My phone started to ring. It was them. I ignored them and quickly ran to my vehicle. As soon as I was about to take off, a car was approaching from behind me. The car parked right behind me, and 2 men, each wearing a mask, stepped out. Not only that, but they opened the back seat of the car and took out Crystal. They had captured her. They knew everything we had done. I should have taken off. One of the men took out a gun and pointed at me to step outside my vehicle. I stepped out and they wanted me to go inside. They took me and Crystal into the room with the client's dead body. I knew what they were going to do to us. Meanwhile, Crystal was just crying. I needed to do something, or else we would be dead bodies, right next to the one that's already on the floor. I saw that Crystal was right beside the switch to the lights. I looked at her and signaled my eyes to the switches to turn them off. The moment Crystal turned off the lights, I ran towards one of the masked men. Gunshots fired as the men were yelling to turn on the lights. I grabbed the power drill that was on the floor and drilled it right into the man's chest. I stuck the drill all the way in and didn't stop till I heard the man choking from his own blood. As soon as I got off him and heard Crystal breathing hard and yelling, I turned on the lights and witnessed Crystal stabbing the other man with a scalpel in the face. Half of his mask was gone from the punctures. I got Crystal and told her to stop. She was scared, terrified. She then hugged me and began to cry. Both of us were alive. We walked over to my vehicle and took off, both of us covered in blood. The sun was coming out, as it was already 6:30 in the morning. Now, both of us knew we had to change our identities, and I knew a guy who could do it. I met him in jail, and we drove over to his place right away. Sometimes, I do think that maybe it would have been better off if both of us were dead, since we would now have to live in fear for the rest of our life. Lucky for us, I haven't heard or seen of anything, but you never know. These people always manage to find you. Let's hope they don't catch me now, or for the rest of my life.